And staying with Mexican cartels, joining us now with analysis is Stefano Ritondale. He's a Mexican cartel expert as well as the chief intelligence officer over at Artorias. Thank you so much for joining us, Stefano. Can you help our audience understand the significance of the Mexican National Guard killing cartel leader El Mencho?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me. And Mencho was the leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. And what's important to note is the Jalisco New Generation Cartel has been in existence just over a decade, and Mencho created it and led it. And in that time period, he managed to create this group from something that was unknown to the most powerful cartel in Mexico and even the most powerful criminal organization around the world. The last intelligence assessment we have with the DEA is that CGNG has a presence in over 40 countries. And so his death and killing was a significant event for the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, and it really puts it in its first true test right now to see if its long-term viability and if it can continue as a singular organization under a new leader, or if they start fracturing and we see other groups and cartels form as a result.
Now, the blowback from taking him out has been significant, as we've been covering. How powerful is this cartel?
It is extremely powerful, and they have presence across many areas in Mexico. You know, originally, shortly after the report came out that Mencho was killed, we saw attacks across Mexico. I think a lot of the people have saw Puerto Vallarta because it's a key tourist town. But it's important to note it was geographically dispersed across various states. We saw it in Tamaulipas, which borders Texas. We saw violence in Jalisco, Zacatecas, Tabasco, Michoacan, and I mean, I can go on and on. It was very widespread, and it was really done as a retaliation for what happened. But more importantly, outside of just the burning of vehicles and damage to businesses, we did see Jalisco New Generation Cartel conduct targeted attacks against the Mexican National Guard, and up to 25 soldiers were killed in the immediate aftermath, clearly as a retaliation. It shows that the Jalisco New Generation Cartel is very violent, and they can cause casualties within the Mexican military.
Yeah, there was a striking press announcement yesterday from President Sheinbaum announcing that and confirming these casualties as you're discussing. So I want to explore that a little bit with the Mexican government. How had they been approaching the cartels historically? And you mentioned this particular crime organization is only 10 years old, but there are others. Does this hit against the leader of this cartel reflect a change of approach or something that's been building all along?
So I think we would have to analyze it from various cartels aspects. But I think with the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the arrest of this leader is a before and after. I mean, we have seen the Mexican government target lower level figures within the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. We have seen them specifically target members of kind of the immediate, some of the family members of El Mencho, and that are very much responsible for financial harm. But El Mencho was completely different. And in many arguments, you can almost look at him as somebody that was kind of viewed as almost untouchable. And because of the fear of kind of what happened, and I think the pressure within the Trump administration on Mexico kind of was the determining factor to get them to target Mencho directly. Now, again, the key question is how much of a direct impact this will have in the cartel. I'm receiving reports that it does look like they've already named a new leader. His alias is O3. And it looks like there is a coalescing around him. But obviously, we're pretty close from his death. We'll see the long-term viability. But it does look like the Mexican government is going to continue to take a hard approach with Jalisco New Generation Cartel. And other cartels in the region should be looking, because if they can go after Mencho, he's really the top player in the cartel scape. So other leaders are probably easily next in line.
Now, when we look at the U.S. and what was the mafia in the 70s and 80s, very powerful. And then all of a sudden, there was a much more coordinated effort to remove it. And I think part of that was because state, local, and federal resources had not previously been working together. Rudy Giuliani, one of the folks very much involved in having a much more holistic approach to rooting that out. And then more recently in El Salvador, it went from one of the most dangerous places in Latin America with now being one of the safest. Are there any parallels here, or is the action sort of a gesture by the Sheinbaum administration more to pacify Trump, or do you think that there are sweeping changes up ahead?
So I think one of the main issues we're going to run into in Mexico is the corruption piece. That's going to be the kind of one of the fundamental problem sets that we're going to run into. And unfortunately, the killing of a cartel leader doesn't necessarily mean that the cartel will necessarily degrade. And if anything, we might see splintering and factionings, and the problem that causes as violence goes up. I mean, in El Salvador, we've seen a case where kind of this mass incarceration, but we also know the Bukele government is known to kind of have deals with certain gangs, specifically MS-13, and kind of protect some of the leadership and try to use that as a way to reduce violence. And unfortunately, those are case examples where we might see in Mexico in certain states that happens. But you highlight a key problem set, I think, is kind of the coordination within the federal, state, and local aspect to really go after this. Cartels have deeply entrenched themselves in the Mexican country specifically, but more importantly in the economy and the financial sector. Corruption is a key piece. So it's not only just a military approach, it's trying to remove them from the Mexican economy, which is a lot harder and easier said than done.
And in just our last 30 seconds, it seems like there was always this sort of untouchable thing where cartels never went after tourism. And it seems like with this last spate of violence, maybe those unwritten rules may be changing. What do you expect to see as it relates for safety, both for visitors to Mexico as well as just, ordinary citizens in the Mexican community as it relates to safety on the streets?
Right. I think the violence we saw in Puerto Vallarta was clearly send a message. We didn't really get any reports of them even targeting civilians or trying to target Americans or foreign tourists from a casualty perspective. I think it was more to send a message. And the violence in those specific areas and high tourist areas has gone down. The areas where we're seeing violence continue in Mexico are areas already with higher levels of violence and that we've seen historically in the past, but more related to kind of rural communities or towns outside of the major tourist areas. I won't expect tourism to really suffer that much or be targeted that much after the killing of Mencho. Tourism is actually a key area where the cartels make money. There was recent sanctions on a resort who served as a fraud. So keep an eye on the State Department travel advisory, always follow that, but more than likely the violence will go back to what we've historically seen, not necessarily in major tourist or foreign tourist perspective.
Appreciate your analysis this morning. Stefano Ritondale, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.